Well, good morning, my fellow Australian citizens. What a beautiful day it is to be living in Australia. Except, of course, if you happen to be an Australian citizen in India. I have a message for you, you dirty, smelly, rotten, selfish Indians. Is that right? Yeah. That went to India to bathe in the river Ganges, went to Hindu festivals, attended political rallies, attended weddings and funerals. You selfish, selfish people. You are definitely not Australian enough. You should have known better and should have never have left this great and beautiful, lucky country. You will now pay the ultimate price. So deal with it. Now, I'm speaking in jest. I don't actually think like this. But I was just trying to do a summary of a lot of the comments I've been reading on, especially ABC's Facebook page. A lot of lefties on ABC's Facebook page have fully lost any concept of compassion because they've been riddled with so much fear about COVID. And some of you might think this is rightly so, and you know this is what it takes to prevent a disaster occurring in Australia again, apparently. My take on this is, now full disclosure, I'm actually not Indian. I do look Indian and I do get a lot of comments saying that you are Indian. I am a Australian. My heritage is a Sri Lankan. And all those things I said about Indians, I actually don't believe them in that way. But these are the things that are being said openly in our community, especially online. And I know social media is a very toxic place, and it allows people to behave in this manner. But particularly, I'm seeing this from a lot of people who are otherwise very reasoned. I think they seem to be very mild-mannered. And I think a lot of this is coming through fear. It's nothing to do with racism as such. They're just very fearful. And because of fear, they're trying to rationalize the reasons why Australian citizens should not be allowed back into this country. Now, as far as I go, what does it mean to be a citizen of this country? I'm an Australian citizen. I have an Australian passport, whatever it is. Like, is that what makes me citizen in this country? And I think a lot of immigrants are probably having this going through in their mind, especially those that are either Indian or look Indian, might be wondering, what exactly does it mean to be a part of this community in Australia, particularly when shit hits the fan and you're overseas. What protections are afforded to you based on your citizenship? And does the actual safety of the country itself override any, safety for a single person, overseas? Now, in this scenario, it happens to be India, and a lot of these Australian citizens or residents who are in India are obviously stranded because of all the what's happening in India, as reported by the media and told to us by our government. And of course, the reaction of our government back home in Australia. Now, I think it is ridiculous to be stripping people of their citizenship. Now, I know it's a temporary thing, and I know technically no one's citizenship has been stripped away. It's a protective measure. But having said that, you look at the consequences of doing this type of action, and it's profound. It has a ripple effect throughout the entire community, and it's something that will be discussed and go on in our day-to-day conversations, particularly within the Indian community, for a long time to come. Now, Indian Australians, or Australians of Indian heritage, citizens who are parents are formerly from India, whatever it is, they do contribute in many different ways to life in Australia. And I think for a lot of them, they do really feel that they are a part of this country and are Australian. Now, a lot of people aren't happy on the Facebook comments that these people would dare visit their parents, dying parents or ill parents in India, to give them, look after them or whatever it is a few months ago, when given that opportunity. So there is that ability for them to travel. And yes, I know it's a risk. They're taking a risk and people do stupid things. Personally, I would not travel during this period of time. That's just me. That's not because I'm fearful of the COVID situation in other countries, and it's not because I'm heartless and I don't want to go see my grandparents or something in Sri Lanka, whatever it is. I am very aware of how reactionary our governments are and how they act without reason and do things like what they've done now when shit hits the fan. Our government has shown us time and time again throughout this past year, during this COVID period, that all they have is a very small toolkit. The only tools they really have is locking borders and banning things. That is their solution to this whole thing. And some of you might take away from that and say, like, look, we're doing pretty well in Australia, so, it works. Yeah, I'm going to say doing that kind of thing works, but at what cost? So we have to have that balance. And I think, the government here really has attempted for a long time to, especially the federal government, to keep that kind of balance, but they've failed on numerous occasions. And I think this is the biggest failure yet. To get to a stage where we are, almost 1.5 years into this COVID saga, to get to a stage where we are now stripping Australians of their identity overseas and threatening them with jail and $60,000 fines for even daring to think that they could come back here to the safety of their country. A country that they do contribute to, a country that they have their children that go to school in, they participate in the local community in many different ways, whether they're in different professions, whether they're your doctor, your lawyer, or they're your Uber driver or taxi driver or whatever it is. Like, people of Indian descent, Indian Australians, contribute to Australia in many different ways. And to think that these people are now excluded from our community because of the country they happen to be in is a bit ridiculous. I'm all for bringing people back and, making them quarantine or whatever it is that has to be done as a last stopgap measure if that's what's needed. But stripping people of their identity and telling them that they're less and making them feel like they're less, I think is probably a step too far for the Australian way. In the sense that the way I've been taught what is the Australian way and the respect I should have for all people, and our egalitarian nature about being fair, and we are a lucky country because of these reasons, and we love multiculturalism. Daniel Andrews would love to, he has donned on a turban and spoken and, part of the Sikh community and all this kind of stuff he's done. And, Scott Morrison cooks up Indian dishes and says, lame Indian phrases to kind of fit into the community. But really, when it comes to show our true nature as a multicultural society that values and respects all these cultures, we're struggling. And we're struggling during our greatest test, which is during a crisis of this magnitude. And, on the second point for me, a lot of misinformation about India. So if you're an Australian citizen in India, when you take up Australian citizenship, as far as I know, I could be wrong, but as far as I know from the literature, you actually give up your right as an Indian citizen. So you can't be a dual citizen of these countries. Okay, they are just Australian citizens. So technically, we have Australians who have no, they Indian, they look Indian, whatever it is, but they actually have no attachment. The Indian government has no obligation to actually protect these people. And the Australian government actually has even a far greater obligation to these people because they're not dual nationals. They've given up everything to be a part of this community. So I think it's a big issue, and obviously it's being discussed a lot in the community. A lot of the discussions are kind of going into this kind of weird negative territory where people are like merging multiple different problems they have with the Indian community in Australia, apparently. Some people are unhappy about telemarketers, some people are unhappy about their Uber drivers, whatever it is. I'm seeing all these kind of random comments which really have nothing to do with the fact that these are actually Australian citizens. They're Australian as you, or they're Australian as me. And we should be doing everything that we can to ensure that our government takes care of them in the correct manner. And definitely stripping people of their identity or their citizenship in a time like this, during a crisis, during a pandemic, during, this kind of situation, this is when identity and citizenship matters the most. This is when you look to your country. It doesn't matter what mistake, what stupid thing you've done in your life and what silly decision you've made to go overseas. This is when these things should matter. We have situations in this country where we go into bat for drug smugglers in Bali, or people who have done, all sorts of crazy things in crazy countries they should have never gone to. And, we rally as a community, and maybe we don't like them and stuff, but we want to protect them, and we offer our assistance and protection to these people. Now, in this scenario, yes, we do have people that during a pandemic left this country, left the safe shores of Australia to go to India. And so, they did take a risk, and they took a risk knowing maybe this was possible. But I don't think I would have even thought possibly that people would be stripped of their citizenship in this manner. And I'm someone that follows these things very closely, but I didn't really see our government reacting in this extreme manner, where, some people have even said it's a human rights abuse. And there's a lot of merit to those kind of things being said. Not much will be done about it, because we've been living through human rights abuses in our own states, in Australia, for a long time now, and not much gets done, and no one really gives a crap when their freedom comes back. So we are seeing our individual identities, our individual liberties and freedoms, and the very meaning of what it means to be Australian today, being altered and changed by the government. A government who's having difficulty reacting to the situation as it evolves around the world and in our country as well. And I think it's even if we write this out with a lot less drama in Australia compared to the rest of the world, I don't think we can hold our head high as we used to. I think there really needs to be a further discussion on our identity, particularly as Australians, and also on the protection of our rights, our human rights, and our freedoms and our civil liberties, which have been attacked here at home and now overseas after we've travelled. So that's just my take on this situation with Australian citizenship and what's happening to the Indian community. As far as the situation in India goes, I think, again, we are seeing this kind of beat up fear mongering by our friends in the media here and also in India as well. Now, India is a very complex place. It's a very kind of, it's a very hard to understand country if you've never either been there, or if you if you've just not really understood the culture, if you're not from that part of the world and you don't understand how these things work, it's a very difficult place to understand, because we have this kind of romanticized view of India sometimes from, whether it's from Bollywood movies or, whether it's our connection through watching Indian cricketers or whatever it is. Like, our understanding of India is not the same as what the reality of India is. And the portrayal of India in the media is disingenuous and, full of crap most of the time. A lot of the problems that India is facing today, as it relates to COVID, has very little to do with the severity of COVID itself. Okay, has very little to do with that. The biggest issue facing India is the fact that it is India. And what I mean by that is that it is a country with a population of 1 billion plus people. You have extreme poverty as much as you have extreme wealth. The rate of poverty is, even in the middle class, the type of poverty that's there is a lot different to what we would experience as poverty in Australia in our middle class when we have these kind of issues. So you have this nation with these extremes. You have very ancient traditions that is very difficult to. You will not ever change these things, and a lot of people along the years have learnt this. The British, when they colonized India, whatever it is, you cannot change these ancient ways of life that people keep very close to their hearts. And then you have this kind of very extreme political battles in India. Whether it's the far left, far right, whatever it is, these different ideologies, whether it's parties who are more kind of religious to one religious domination, whatever it is, you have this kind of very crazy political system that you could never compare to even a system in Australia or in America. It's very people driven. It's very a lot of party politics, and there's a lot of for lack of a better word, corruption in the way that people handle themselves. So for some governments in India, or some opposition parties or political parties or whatever it is, these are opportune times to, beat home certain messages and show certain weaknesses in their opposition. So you're getting this kind of play happening, and the international world is involved. And, it's not like North Korea where everything's shut out or China shut out. In China, when they're having these problems with COVID or whatever it is, they can shut out the international media. In India, it doesn't work quite that way. It's kind of a bit more of a free, open, democratic country. And so you have these, crazy Western journalists and stuff in there just beating up this, hanging around hospitals, filming people, and, just showing the craziest things. And if you're not exposed to these things normally, the way you react to seeing those images is fear. And for me, when I see those images in India, and again, I don't mean to cause offense to anyone, but when I see those images coming out of India, I think, well, this is what's going to happen when shit hits the fan in India, of course. If you have Western nations like the United States and the UK who have gone through massive waves of the coronavirus, who have struggled to protect their citizens, who have struggled to stop it from exploding in their countries. These are highly developed Western nations with crap loads of money, a much bigger middle class, and less poverty compared to India, much less actually, lower population rates, and they're struggling. So if we look at the way those countries dealt with it, and to think that when it hits the third world, whether it's in India or Brazil, in that kind of third world metric that we look at the world in, it's a developing nation, but many parts of it is still considered third worldly by the West. If you think about what would happen when something like this hits that hospital infrastructure, or hits that medical apparatus, or their way of life in those countries, of course, it's going to be disastrous in many levels. And a lot of the suffering and a lot of the things that you're seeing on television is the accumulation of decades and decades, if not hundreds of years of nonsense in those countries. And it's not going to be fixed overnight. It's not going to be fixed with a vaccine. It's not going to be fixed with any of these things. Unfortunately, these countries are going to have to go through this for a lot more years to come, because of the ramifications of their crappy systems to begin with. Now, I'm not saying that India doesn't have a really high standard of medical care, and they actually do. They're very advanced in all those things, but their inability to provide that to all of their citizens equally is very limited. And this illusion that somehow that everyone is dying because of the Indian government's, lack of a response or something, is only partly true. The truth is, what's happening in India is the natural process, really, for a country that is built on that type of system. Now, we are reacting to this in a totally different, crazy way, because I see Australians commenting on these Facebook posts, because the media is just like pumping them out, right, about India. They're commenting saying, we should keep out the Australians, because if they come here, we'll turn into India. And no, that's not the case. Australia will not turn into India. Australia is not even turning into the UK or turning into Europe or turning into the United States. And that has very little to do with our actual government response. It's more to do with the systems in place here, the population, how spread out we are, and how easy it is for our government to manage this country. So there's a lot of different things here at play. The other crazy thing I've seen is like, people are saying, look how crazy it is in India. Coronavirus is so bad. They're just burning people everywhere on the street, and everyone's just dying on the street, and people are just being burnt on the street. Like, look at it, it's so crazy. They're burning people. And a lot of these people are just ignorant, because in India, cremation and burning people on funeral pyres and stuff like this is standard practice. And yes, that's increased a lot more because people are dying at a faster rate. But if you walk down into the city of Melbourne and you walk down the Yarra, you will not ever see people, there with a funeral pyre burning people and pushing them into the river in the Yarra. Now, in India, for instance, you might walk into an occasion where you see people being cremated by a river, or a body being cremated by the river. There's parts of in parts of India where this happens. So, for a lot of people who are from South Asia that are seeing these things, it's not as graphic for us, because this is kind of like the way of life in that ancient land. Obviously, the media is beating it up to a crazy extent, because whenever they report this thing, they just love showing these bodies burning. I mean, it's just like they're fascinated with showing people's bodies being burnt. Can you imagine if we were just showing like shots of morgues and all this kind of stuff all the time whenever we talked about deaths in Australia? That rarely happened, right? When we were talking about the 800 deaths in Victoria, we never really ever saw a body or all these kind of things, because it all happens in private. So maybe that's why we weren't as outraged about what was happening in Victoria back then, because everything was kind of like, this person died and you never really saw about it. Or this day 4 people died and we never really saw anything about it. We just heard the government saying something about it. Well, in India, it's really different, because all this thing kind of happens very open in the public. Same in Brazil, you have lots of footage of people, digging mass graves and putting bodies and all this kind of, putting coffins in there. And that's really because as developing nations, as these third world areas, they're having issues handling, the infrastructure is just not there. And I know I'm rattling on here, but if you're still here with me, listening to me, the next thing I want to talk about India is really the number of cases we are getting told every single day. So we're being told it's 300,000 cases, it's 400,000 cases. Now, to get that amount of cases in India, it's quite possible with the population. But, we have to suspend our minds for 1 second, because we are being told constantly that the infrastructure in India has failed so badly that there's no support for these people who are just dying on the street. Okay, that's one narrative of the media. And then on the same note, we are being told that India is doing this testing at like such a enormous high rate that they're testing hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions, to get those positive results. And they're able to quickly each day turn around these results to say that there's 400,000 people infected. Now, for a country whose entire infrastructure has failed to such a point where people are dying on the street, how is it possible for them to be giving out these accurate test results, And at the same time, we have Australian government saying that they're not convinced about the test results that passengers who are flying from India are giving them. So how can we take these numbers at face value? I'm not taking these numbers at face value. It might be less, it might be more people who are being infected, but we are being told to take into consideration that the Indian system, the medical apparatus, has completely failed. So for a system that's completely failed, how are they able to give out so many results, So as people, we have to think logically and think about how it's possible that these things are actually, the way they're being reported, is it actually true or real? And, I'm not going to talk too much more about India, but to say that, people in the Indian community, people in the South Asian community, people who have friends in India, or family in India, or, just talking to people, from that region of the world, they have a very different view of what's happening over there right now. And it is not the same way that people here are being told to think about it, is what I'm telling you. And maybe some people who you meet who are of Indian descent might tell you this And some people might tell you a totally different story and go along with the whole government narrative that there's a massive humanitarian crisis in India. And I'm telling you that there is a crisis, but it's not the COVID crisis that is being made out to be. It's a crisis of a totally different making, and we should be very skeptical about what we're hearing. And on that, predicated on that, we should really think about the way that we are treating people of Indian descent, or Indian Australians, or Australian citizens who of Indian heritage are stuck in India right now. Because we have to ask ourselves, would we treat Australians in Europe or in the United States the same way when they were going through their massive waves, knowing all this information? And we didn't. Going forward, that might change, but if we look at it back at how people were treated, we didn't treat them that way. I'm losing my voice, and I've been talking for a long time, but I just wanted to share my thoughts. I apologize if I've caused offense to anyone, whether my fellow Australian citizens or people from India or whatever it is. This is just my thoughts, my views, my opinions. Please feel free to educate me and tell me why I'm wrong. Please feel free to share your data or whatever it is. But yeah, thinking about everything that's happening, and we should really consider helping our fellow Australians who are stuck in India. Thank you, and see you guys next time.